My name is Shawn Kinley. I'm from Canada, a company called the Loose Moose Theatre, and we improvise. I've been improvising for over 30 years now, and it's a form of theatre where you make things up as you go along. I teach and improvise all over the world, about 43 different countries, and that's who I am. Theatrical improvisation is when you take the information from the audience, or you take spontaneous information and you develop theater in the moment. Improvisation is in a relatively new state in its current form. So it's evolving in the same way that you look at dance now as a form that exists. Improvisation will eventually get there, but right now, a lot of people don't know what improvisation is. There's long form improvisation, which can be a play that lasts for 2 hours without too much input from the audience. Short form improvisation, which can be just comedic or a variety of comedic and serious and frightening and any other kinds of scenes. There's a lot of psychological improvisation that's going on, like playback theater, which interviews individuals and brings out their ideas on stage about their life. Very many formats are kind of moving in that direction. The Life Game by Keith Johnstone is one. Playback, How It Was. There's many formats, basically taking the life of the person and bringing that out on stage. And Keith Johnstone is one of the founders of modern improvisation, along with Viola Spolin. Keith's formats focus on narrative or telling the story. Viola Spolin was mainly focused on creating the exercise for children, and around the world these formats have started to evolve what we see in current improvisation, the genre. My style, again, comes from Keith Johnstone's style. He looks at the basic his original technique was to look at actors and what's getting in the way of them being good actors on stage. And generally, it's human defense mechanisms that get in the way. So his style was always to look at the human being and what's stopping you from being creative, what's stopping you from taking risks on stage. And one approach is a simple technique called blocking. We want to protect ourselves constantly. It makes us safe in the world. And in situations where someone says jump off a cliff, you say no, and that's a very good thing to do to protect yourself. Whereas on stage, we want to see risks taken. So we don't want to bring that psychological barrier of protection on stage, and we have to learn to, first of all, recognize it, then deal with it, and play with it. So accepting and blocking is one of the primary techniques. Then you take a look at the opposite side, people who are frightened of revealing things about themselves, and so we have a technique called wimping. Wimping is when you don't define. If I tell you I want to do some ballet dance on stage, we think that's okay. But if I have my friends hanging out and I go, I'd like to do some ballet dancing, I might feel judged by that. So to protect myself, if someone says, what do you want to do? I might say, I don't know, what do you want to do? That doesn't work on stage because it doesn't define the information and move forward. So, whereas blocking protects me from going into your idea, wimping protects me from going into my own idea. It's all about getting rid of the protection mechanisms. Everything. I've taught people in military, in amateur groups, theater groups. Just 2 months ago, I did one for family therapist, systemic practice in Newcastle, England. It's in every area. Improvisation is such a broad idea. The idea that we improvise every day in life. Our thinking is an improvisational kind of concept to adapt, to be aware, to tell a story, to see a story. It's all improvisation. So I've ended up in probably as many different fields as probably you can imagine, from teaching to military to housewives to kids. Tons and tons and tons and tons. I mean, the work that I was doing a few months ago in London was with a therapist, a psychologist therapist, and it was the specific reason why he wanted me to come in to bring the advanced work of of improvisation into the field that he was doing. I learned a ton watching them doing it too. There's a process where they use two groups of psychologists. One will discuss information with the patients and the clients, usually a family, while the other sits in the room and listens to the work that's going on. Then the family and the psychologists here are quiet, while this group of psychologists just talk about what they've heard. I heard the family, blah, blah, blah. I heard the father say, I feel the father was also, and so they do kind of a reflection of what's going on here. My observation when I saw that was that there's problems, like in improvisation, we know that everything is an offer. My sitting here and looking away from you and out the window has an effect on you. So on stage, the audience sees that and they tell a story of why this person is looking away, and we have to incorporate that into a scene work. This family who sits there and listens to people talking about them, or when they're talking about themselves, they're aware of these people listening to them, they have an effect. Their talking is now changed by the fact that they're being listened to, like the idea of Schrodinger's cat, where the scientific observation is affecting the experiment. So I had to tell them that their form of listening was actually an offer being made, and it's affecting the people who are speaking. So they're not getting the true information that they want to get. So that was just one little example, but there was tons of that kind of stuff. And again, very interesting to watch how their process reflected improvisation and how it could be bettered by the improvisation techniques that we use. In communication, everybody understands that more of the communication is coming from non-verbal cues. Tone of voice makes a difference. Eye contact, physical expression, body shape. As an improviser, you're taught to see all the offers, all the potential for communication on stage, and I think this is where it's an excellent method for training communicators and training people who have to be aware of the whole communication process. I was working with UN negotiators, and in that situation, you're not always dealing with people who speak your own language, so you have to learn to see what else is going on underneath the surface. One of the things I find interesting is the work of Paul Ekman. And Paul Ekman, whose work ended up being focused on in a television show called Lie to Me, is based on the micro expressions of a body when they speak, of how a person might lie, or the stress that causes change in a body when they're talking. And so I use a lot of that kind of work in getting people to read others on stage. If you look at a nervous improviser on stage, when they're asked a question, they won't just answer, how are you doing? They won't say, fine, thanks for asking. They'll say, I'm doing really good. Life is great, and I'm happy. I'm fantastic, and I've got a monkey here in my hands. And it's like their ideas go all over the place. When stress starts to affect a person, their eyes start moving around, they start speaking really fast, and they won't stop talking, because people who lie, people who are under stress, they don't want to be noticed as being stressed, they don't want to be noticed as being the liar, and so they will keep talking so that maybe they won't get caught in their lie. Simple things like that are just fascinating for me to watch continually play out over and over and over and over again. And it comes purely from the psychological realm, but it's played on a practical level with improvisation in daily life. I think a lot of psychologists should drop into improvisation classes and watch what's going on, so that they stop being theoretical about the things and they see it actually in practice. There's the concept of mirror neurons, which have always fascinated me, and you see it happening all the time, where the human being on stage will start to reflect the other human beings on stage, and you start seeing mirrors, or you see a sympathetic character on stage, and you watch the audience, and 40 or 50 people are all starting to behave in the same way, with big eyes, or leaning forward, or eyes down if it's the sinister person that they're watching on stage. So things like mirror neurons happen, the micro expressions happen, Einstellung effect, it happens. It's this all kinds of great psychological qualities that happen. And in teaching, it's it's an extraordinary thing, and it's only starting now to be in schools around the world and in universities around the world that improvisation is starting to find its way into the classrooms. Most of the teachers, most of the people who end university, the jobs that they're getting into have changed from the time that they start at university, and so they're not being taught all the information they need when they go into the jobs. So the best we can do is teach them adaptive skills so they can adapt and learn to be ready for these skills and change their thinking, change their mindset and their process, so that when they get into the real world, they can affect and face the needs. It's great to watch people in Keith's class, because he'll start an exercise or start describing an exercise, and if the exercise goes well, he's actually not very happy. He's going, well, I've picked the wrong people. They're experts at this. We have nothing to learn from here. Let's move on. Whereas if someone does something wrong, he goes, brilliant. This was very good. Now we can improve. And it's a very good concept. If you can start to change your mindset from the belief that the failure is the worst thing into the failure is the great opportunity, then you can grow. But most people want to be the experts right away. There's exercises where you just have to remember a person's name and slap your hands toward them and say their name. People get under such great stress, even with people that they know. They think, I'm going to forget these names, I'm going to forget these names. And so one of the main concepts is how to deal with failure, and not to deal with it by getting rid of it or beating it, but by accepting that that's part of the process of life and how to incorporate it. The best scientists around the world are the ones who understand this. If we didn't have people who accept failure and say, great, we've got a mistake, what can we learn from this? How can we play with this? We wouldn't have Post-it notes, which were a mistake. We wouldn't have Velcro, which was a mistake. Microwave ovens. We wouldn't have all of these great discoveries that changed our lives, because they would have been easily seen as a mistake and pushed aside to look at the success. So in improvisation, for me, I'm always focusing on their bad training that they've already had. And we've all had the bad training where teachers tell us, sit still in class, be quiet in class. And that goes against our thinking and our way of behaving generally as a child. Children are moving creatures, kinesthetic creatures, auditory creatures, social creatures, and you shut that down, and then you shut down a big part of the brain that processes and plays with information. I was just listening to some information about serotonin and how it affects the brain and where the sensors happen in the brain. And I believe that a lot of the work that teachers in the school system do these days are geared to shut down all serotonin and shut down all the qualities in the brain that stay open. We want censor and control so the teacher doesn't have kids running around. But in doing so, we remove the creativity and the play and the ability to learn. Yeah, very much. One of actually Keith's lines of work was to look at mask work. His style of mask work went into something called trance mask. And trance mask was focused on, can you get the performer out of their brain so they're not intellectualizing everything? It would only be successful for a second or two at a time. You put the mask on, a mirror would come up, and you'd react emotionally and physically into the state of what the mask was telling you to do. The people who perfect this style are in perfect flow. There's no intellect getting in the way. The body and the brain and the spirit are all in one kind of connective tissue. That's not going to always happen. For us general improvisers who aren't using masks on stage, it happens in moments where the idea of accepting happens. There is no wrong answer. There's no reason to be intellectual and judgmental because everything is okay. And so that kind of aids in the idea of flow. There's a musician who wrote the book Free Play. And Free Play is about how musicians go into flow in an improvisation state. And I think it's easier for musicians with music because music has a deeper kind of transcending feeling than the intellectual process of a narrative improviser looking for the story. So there's more difficulty in our form than in other forms of improvisation. improvisation in the future is going to broaden into millions and millions and millions of different areas and different of ways, and it's only limited by the way that the psychologists, the theater practitioners, the teachers will start to play with it, because improvisation has its core in our living and in our thinking. It can be anywhere and anything.
Well, thank you very much for this interview.
Thanks.
And, enjoy your 2 days.
Yes.
In Bergen.
Yes, thank you very much.
Like with all the mumbling and stuff, but
And cutting out you saying, there I am talking.
yeah. But yeah, thank you. It's really nice of you to.
Is this the first time you've done an interview?